Anthony Rolf Johnson was the tenor, Graham Johnson the pianist, La Barchetta, one of the songs in Venetian dialect by Ronaldo Hahn. James Cahill, I suppose Venice along with Rome and Florence evoke a particular magic in terms of the Grand Tour, don't they?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, Venice was one of the early stop-offs, and Venice was interesting in a way because it didn't really have a classical history. It was a relatively modern creation as a city, and I suppose if you went to Venice you were really, there was classical stuff to see, but you were looking at Renaissance art, contemporary art as well, but then the idea of the Grand Tour, of course, is you sort of trickled down through the Italian peninsula, Bologna, Rome, and then actually increasingly on to Florence, of course, but then on to Naples from the mid-18th century, with the discovery of Pompeii and Herculaneum. Naples, the south, was also an important destination.
I always think of the Grand Tour in its earlier stages in the 17th and 18th century as being predominantly about aristocratic young men setting off for quite a long time, maybe a year.
Yeah, it was exactly that. With these three pieces tonight, we're in the era of what you could call the sort of the long 19th century, and the Grand Tour really had its heyday. It was at its peak the century before then, and it was all about aristocratic young men, those who could afford it, going abroad, roaming the continent and encountering the remnants of antiquity, and also having a really good time. It was about learning, completing one's education. It was also about drinking, gambling and sex. And so, these young men would pick up all sorts of artifacts and stuff and bring them home. They also brought back venereal disease quite often.
There might be a tutor in tow as perhaps sometimes a cover.
Yes, there would be. That was commonplace. You would go, if you were wealthy enough, with a retinue of servants, maybe a valet, maybe a cook, and a tutor, a scholarly companion who was known as a bear leader. And I rather like this idea of the aristocrat being this kind of wild creature that had to be tamed and controlled and led back to the serious objects of consideration, the artifacts, the sites.
So by the time we get to Strauss touring Italy at the end of the 19th century, Elgar there at the very beginning of the 20th, aristocratic travel is beginning to be diluted by mass tourism.
Yeah, we've really entered by then the era of mass tourism. In the mid-19th century, with the spread of the railways through Europe, steamship travel, tourism was available to many more people. So the Grand Tour had lost this sense of elitism and something rarefied, but something of the sensibility did remain. I think, among artists particularly, this idea of going to foreign climes and finding inspiration, finding something new and different from the ordinary, was still very much there. But yes, it is true to say that we're in very much in the era of mass tourism by the time you get to Elgar and the time that he spent in Alessio.
Although a very different form of mass tourism from how we might see it today, and a mass tourism that opened up these parts of Europe to writers, to artists who might not have had the money to go previously.
Yeah, that's right. And people were writing a lot about their experiences of travel. You had guides to the continent in the form of the Baedeker, was the famous one that was published in English in the later part of the 19th century. And actually, since the days of the Grand Tour, there had been a tradition, a practice of writing letters home, of writing about your experience. There's the famous example of Goethe's, the Romantic German poet, his Italian journey of 1816, which chronicled the time he spent in Italy some 40 years prior. So that's a very interesting document in the sense that it overlays his early youthful experience with, later memory and later thoughts. But this was common, that people would write sort of proto-travel memoirs, if you like.
A lot of which were pretty terrible.
They were a mixed bag. It's interesting to see how it changed, though, as well, because even in the 18th century, with something like Lawrence Stern's sentimental journey through France and Italy, you have this new emphasis on subjective experience, on emotion, on sentiment, quite literally, and you see that elsewhere, including in the recordings of some women travellers. The Grand Tour was very much a male exploit. It was about masculinity, about learning to be a man. Women didn't really do it, but a few did, if they were wealthy enough, sometimes accompanying their husbands or families. And there are examples of women who wrote letters, for example, Lady Anna Miller in the 18th century wrote a collection of letters from Italy. It was called Describing the Manners, Customs, Antiquities, Paintings, etc. of that country, which sort of covers all of it.
Was there a sense that these would often be quite idealised accounts? I mean, a bit like, I suppose, someone might now put a picture on Instagram of their holiday that they very carefully curated, because they're absolutely determined that everyone back at home thinks they're having a good time, even if perhaps they're not. I mean, that's presumably no different 100, 200 years ago.
Yeah, the Instagram filter, or its 18th, 19th century equivalent, was very much at work. I mean, it's fascinating. There was always this combination of bearing witness, and the idea of eyewitness testimony did become really important in this era, but also inevitably a sort of idealization, which had to do a lot with people's education, the way that they'd encountered classical antiquity growing up, through school and university before they ever went there. A lot of people had a sort of a vision of what Italy and Greece might be like before they ever went, if they ever went, and sometimes it was hard to reconcile that with the reality. Certainly in a lot of the art of the 18th and 19th centuries, there's a mixture of the two. There's a mixture of recording what the artist saw, and at the same time a fair amount of imaginative caprice. I mean, there's even a subgenre of paintings and drawings known as capriccios, where artists like Piranesi would sort of amalgamate all sorts of different classical buildings and remnants into these completely impossible scenarios. So, yeah, a lot of filtering and imagination going on as well.
You mentioned young aristocrats coming back with venereal diseases, but presumably, particularly for travellers from repressed Britain, there was a sense for some of them of being able to go and satisfy unnameable desires.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this was in every sense, the Grand Tour was, a journey of self-actualization, a quest, a finding of oneself, and that, often involved sexual experience. Goethe writes about his Roman love of Faustina, but it was a key dimension of this, and foreign climes, foreign countries generally was sort of seen by xenophobic England, I guess, as a bit of a sin bin, was somewhere where you could go and live a bit more freely, a bit more profligately. I mean, if you take someone like William Hamilton in the 18th century, ambassador to Naples, he notoriously had a relationship with the low-born Emma Hamilton, famed among other things for the classical attitudes she would strike as a kind of party piece. He couldn't have had that relationship in England. Being in Naples meant that a different moral code applied.
Very interesting. Let's move to your book, which tells of Don Lamb, art historian, who spent, when we first meet him, his life in a Cambridge college, attempting to map the classical proportions of Tiepolo's paintings of the skies. He's going to write a book on Tiepolo, and then it all goes wrong in a live BBC radio interview. I mean, this
right.
could be recreating it. He causes something of a stir when he savagely attacks a work of modern art.
That's right. Well, Don has spent his whole life in a Cambridge college. And once upon a time, a lot of academics were like him. He's really steeped in classical ideas about art and beauty and what art should be like, what beauty constitutes. And then one day he walks into the quadrangle of his college and sees this modern installation, a kind of Tracey Emin-style bed that induces in him a truly violent reaction, a kind of mania of hostility. And he makes this very public blunder and has to leave Cambridge under a cloud. He gets cancelled, as we'd say now.
He has a sort of mysterious mentor, Val, who
right.
fixes him a job running a well-established gallery in South London that sounds a little bit like the Dulwich Picture Gallery, but may or may not have
There's some
connections
resemblance to it.
And there he gets another rival in the form of Michael, a rather shiny man from America, Brit, but who's been working in America, who's imposed against his will as his deputy. You're going to read us an extract, and this is where Don's gone to dinner with Michael.
That's right. Don has gone to Michael's house for dinner and has just been welcomed into the living room, so I'll pick the reading up there. The living room is lined with art books. Don glimpses the names of Paul Gauguin, Jacob Epstein, and Mariam Schwartz. Through French doors, he sees a patio strewn with white blossom. The petals have gathered around large, dark boulders. What a lovely house. Anna hands him a glass. Oh, it isn't ours. It's owned by Dulwich College. A school teacher lived here, but he's just retired to Sicily. Taormina, Michael says, folding his arms and looking every inch the hero of the cricket field. A friend of Mike's organised the house for us, Anna explains. Don sits on a small armchair in the corner and holds his glass of wine steady on his knee. Valentine Black, I presume. Yes, that's right. And you're staying at Val's place, aren't you? Says Michael. The Villa of the Mysteries. Don nods and wonders what Michael means. There is an insinuation that they are all in Val's debt, but it's more than that. The Villa of the Mysteries. He grips the stem of his glass. There is a silence before Anna speaks. Did you live in Cambridge a long time, Don? All of my life. He looks through the French doors as if regarding the long span of years. Of course, my work has taken me to Italy many times, Venice especially. A timer goes off in another room. Anna apologizes and retreats. Michael glows in the lamplight. Have I mentioned, Michael says, that I'm going to Italy in the summer to make a TV program? Val said something about it, Don replies. Rome and the Grand Tour? Not just Rome. The producers want me to hike over the Alps and down through Italy. Turin, Florence, across to Pisa, and Venice, surely, Don says. Oh, I don't think we'll bother. Just the important stop-offs. They want some countryside footage as well. I'm going to swim down the Arno all the way through Florence. Anna returns from the kitchen. Michael draws her onto the arm of the sofa and plants a kiss on her cheek. I'll be demystifying the old masters, making art accessible, he says. Don sits very still. You may not know that I made a BBC programme myself in the early 80s, a radio series. It was called A Venetian Odyssey, a little survey of paintings and palaces, not a bit like the boy's own adventure you seem to have planned.
I love this, the kind of fabulous snobbery between Don, who I think probably made a very dry radio programme about Venice, and Michael, who's got television cameras and all the glitz coming with him. And the battle between the two of them is the fantastic part of the denouement of the book, which you say owes a debt to Thomas Mann and Death in Venice.
Yes, it does. I mean, quite a lot of the plot is modelled after Death in Venice, which, of course, in line with what we're listening tonight, is another story of a man, a composer or writer, actually, in the novella, of great stature, of great eminence, going away to a foreign country and having a transformative, in the end, completely disturbing, upending experience. And even though Don never makes it further than South London in Tiepolo Blue, he has an equivalent experience, a kind of sensory awakening, a coming of age, which is also very much in his case a sexual awakening, a gay awakening. He's somebody who, steeped in particular ideas and ideals about art, is also incredibly repressed emotionally and sexually. And so in his early 40s, coming to South London and finding himself among the new art scene of that era, he has this kind of midlife blossoming or flowering, which, yes, takes form from Thomas Mann's story of Gustav von Aschenbach on the Lido in Venice.
And there's a young artist called Ben, who I suppose is his Tadzio. Dulwich
Right.
becomes a sort of proxy for Venice, doesn't it? And the Brockwell Park Lido features almost as the Venetian Lido.
It does very much. I mean, this goes back to what we were saying about artists sort of, on the one hand, recording what they saw, and on the other hand, sort of imagining, filtering, because Venice in Tiepolo Blue is a real place. It's where Tiepolo lived and worked, and so it's the object of Don's scholarly inquiries and yearnings. But on the other hand, it's very much an imaginative idea too. It's actually, it's a mirage, something that existed in his head before he ever went there. And then, as you say, when he goes to South London, that becomes his Venice, in terms of the sort of Gothic elements of the suburban architecture there, the campanile of the school, the green expanses of South London, which are like lagoons, and then the Lido, the open-air swimming pool at Brockwell Park that he ends up frequenting the whole time, and takes on the kind of character for him of a real-life Tiepolo scene, which is his version of the the Lido in Venice.
It's interesting, isn't it? Even if you can recreate it in South London, you can look at treasures from the Uffizi Gallery in Florence in HD on your computer. You can enjoy Tiepolo's frescoes there. You can get a cheap flight to go to many of the places on the Grand Tour. It's lost none of its magic, though, has it? Despite it's changed through commercialism and mass travel.
I think that's right. I think foreign travel, well, particularly after COVID, still has enormous sort of appeal for people, and people still want to walk in the footsteps of grand tourists and those who came after them, D.H. Lawrence, all sorts of others. And, for artists, it will always be essential to be able to go away on a residency somewhere else to find something new.
Tiepolo Blue is published in paperback by Scepter. James Cahill, thank you very much indeed for being with us here at the Proms.
Thank you.
We'll finish our interval with Dreams from Vienna of the European South, courtesy of